Back, boxing fans, to the great show with Sean on Boxing. So of course John Boxing jumps on Dante Boxing's Nation nuts with his hate towards Vergil Ortiz. It's funny because John is now criticizing Ortiz because De La Hoya talked about a potential Ortiz versus Spence fight. This is a fight that's been being talked about for a long time, when Spence was obviously a unified champion at welterweight and Ortiz grew up looking up to him because obviously they're both from Texas, and it was a fight both guys talked about. So the fact that this is being talked about now shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. But the funny thing is, this same dude, John Boxing, literally made videos defending Errol Spence getting a world title fight against Funduro. So he was cool with Errol Spence getting a world title fight, even though he was critical of Lomachenko getting a vacant title fight versus Kambosos. But it was okay for Errol Spence, coming off of a long hiatus and getting knocked the fuck out, to end up getting a world title fight with Funduro, right? And he pushed for that, he defended it, and so he was cool with Spence fighting a world champion, but he's not cool with Spence fighting a top contender, because Ortiz is not a champion right now at the 154-pound division. He is literally one of the top contenders. And it's funny because he's pushing Charles Conwell. We know why he's pushing Charles Conwell, because Charles Conwell's black, and that's the only reason Charles Conwell's name is even coming out of his mouth. Because Dante, the reason he was hating on Vergil Ortiz is because he's not taking on IBF world champion Murtazaliev next for that world title. And so you can understand that a little more than you can understand a potential Charles Conwell fight, because how the fuck is Charles Conwell even a fight that Vergil Ortiz should be considering at this point? Obviously Ortiz and Conwell are in similar situations where what they want is world title opportunities. Conwell's moving up the rankings hoping to get a world title fight. Ortiz is currently the interim WBC champion, meaning that he is in position to get a Sebastian Funduro fight for that world title. Dante was criticizing him because he was saying, oh, you might as well go for Murtazaliev and get the IBF title, as opposed to waiting on Sebastian Funduro. But Sebastian Funduro just finished defending his title. So if the WBC does the same thing they're doing with Bivol and David Benavidez and orders that immediate fight, then there's no issue. The fight will happen next, right? You know, it's funny that people really act as if David Benavidez should get a Bivol fight right away, but then they're not excited or pushing for Vergil Ortiz to get a Sebastian Funduro fight right away. Yet it's the exact same fucking situation. Actually, Vergil Ortiz has done more at the 154-pound division than David Benavidez. He literally just beat an ex-world champion who was in a fucking standout performance against a pound-for-pound top fighter in Bud Crawford. Many people feel Madrimov beat Crawford. Not me, because I'm rational and I don't lie on my channel. But obviously, he showed up and showed out and performed very well. So much so that going into the fight with Ortiz and Madrimov, I thought that Madrimov potentially was going to beat Ortiz. My prediction was Madrimov to win because I felt he had better legs and would be able to win that fight by outboxing Vergil Ortiz. But Vergil Ortiz fought fantastic, did far better against a common opponent in Madrimov than Bud Crawford did, right? And this is the same Vergil Ortiz that beat Boholchuk, right? A guy that should have had a fight with Funduro for that WBC title, but obviously he's been blatantly ducked and dodged like fucking crazy. So the last two opponents that Ortiz has fought have been great, and it's ironic because what we failed to discuss is the fact that on the undercard of Bud Crawford, Ortiz had signed to fight Tim Tszyu, another top level fighter and a guy who was a world champion at 154 pounds. The reason that fight didn't happen has nothing to do with Vergil Ortiz. It has everything to do with Tim Tszyu pulling out of that fight. And just recently, after Vergil Ortiz's fantastic win against Madrimov, they were signing or throwing out an offer to Boots Ennis for a fight that people have been pushing for years now. A fight that obviously for race baiters like Dante and John is a fight that they wanted because they thought the black American fighter, Boots, would show up and show out against the Latin fighter, Ortiz. So they wanted that fight because they wanted to expose the flat-footed Latin fighter and highlight the black American fighter. Yet when push came to shove and Boots Ennis was literally offered the fight, he turned it down, blatantly ducking the opportunity. I didn't hate on Boots because I understand what he's trying to do is fight for unification at 147. So he's doing that next against Stanionis, obviously an opponent that Vergil Ortiz was also supposed to fight. But unfortunately, because of health issues at 147 pounds, that fight was never able to actually happen. But this shows you the level of opposition that this guy consistently is chasing. So if his manager wants to showcase him in a fight against a more conventional opponent to make him look good, coming off of very tough fights, to hype him up and market him and sell him, what exactly is the problem with that? Sebastian Funduro, who currently is a WBC champion, blatantly ducked Bud Crawford, right? This guy, he just fought Booker, right? In a blatant cherry pick. But nobody complained about that. No one shit on and criticized Funduro for taking on that opponent. And you know the difference between this scenario, because Funduro and Ortiz are both Latin fighters, Mexican Americans. The difference is one is a PBC fighter and the other isn't. And that's what this comes down to. Blatant fucking PBC fanboys who will fucking say anything to defend PBC fights and yet criticize and hate on everyone else, even when they're doing more than the PBC fighter.